The Serpent's Embrace. My name is Karim al-Rashid, and I need you to understand something before I tell you this story. Wealth is a prison. Not the romantic kind that poets write about, but a real suffocating cage made of gold bars and lined with silk. When you have more money than entire countries, when your net worth appears in Forbes, but your phone never rings with genuine calls, you learn that isolation isn't just loneliness, it's a disease that eats you from the inside out. I built my fortune in oil and technology, expanding my father's modest drilling operation into a global empire. By 35, I owned 7 houses across 4 continents, a private jet, and enough art to stock a museum. My Dubai mansion alone covered 12 acres of desert, a glass and marble monument to achievement that felt more like a mausoleum. Every day I spent inside it. The servants came and went on schedules, their interactions limited to "yes, sir," and "will that be all, sir?" Business associates spoke to my bank account, not to me. And the women who appeared at galas and charity events, they saw dollar signs where my eyes should have been. I was surrounded by people, but had never been alone again. That's when I found Raja. I discovered him at a private exotic animal auction in Bangkok, coiled in a climate-controlled glass enclosure like a living jewel. The seller, a nervous Thai man with sweating palms, called him a Burmese python, but even I could see this was no ordinary snake. Raja was massive, nearly 11 feet long, thick as a man's torso, with scales that seemed to shift between deep gold and midnight black, depending on the light. But it was his eyes that captivated me. Ancient intelligence. They seemed to look right through the glass and into something deeper than my soul. "Very special," the seller whispered, wiping his forehead with a stained handkerchief. "Very old bloodline. Not for everyone. He chooses his owner." The bidding was fierce, but money has always been my most persuasive argument. I paid $300,000 for Raja, more than most people earn in a lifetime, and had him transported to my Dubai estate within the week. I converted my private library into Raja's domain. Climate-controlled, with specialized lighting and a custom habitat that cost more than luxury cars. But from the first day, he showed no interest in hiding spaces or enriching toys. He wanted to be near me. When I worked at my desk, Raja would emerge from his enclosure and position himself nearby, watching me with those ancient eyes. When I read in my armchair, he would drape himself across the back, his weight a constant, oddly comforting presence. Within a month, I was spending entire evenings talking to him, sharing thoughts I'd never spoken aloud to another living being. "You understand, don't you?" I would say, running my hand along his warm scales. "You know what it's like to be set apart, to be admired but never truly known." Raja would shift slightly at the sound of my voice, and I swear I could feel him listening, not just hearing but truly comprehending every word. For the first time in years, I didn't feel alone. Then, after 2 months of perfect companionship, Raja stopped eating. It began gradually. He turned away from his usual meal, a large rabbit, without even investigating. I assumed it was a dietary preference and ordered different prey: chickens, guinea pigs, even exotic game birds flown in from Africa. Raja showed no interest in any of it. Days turned to weeks. I researched python biology obsessively, adjusting temperature, humidity, and lighting. I consulted with veterinarians via video calls, sending detailed photographs and videos. Everyone had theories. Shedding cycle, territorial stress, seasonal changes, but nothing explained Raja's complete refusal to eat. The weight loss became visible. His magnificent bulk began to diminish, his scales losing their lustrous sheen. But rather than becoming lethargic, Raja seemed more active, more present. He followed me throughout the mansion, no longer content to remain in the library. He would wrap himself around my shoulders during business calls, coil around my legs while I ate solitary dinners, and every night he would slide into my bed and curl around me like a living blanket. The sensation was intoxicating. His muscular coils provided a warmth and pressure that felt like the embrace I'd been craving my entire adult life. For the first time since childhood, I slept without nightmares, without the crushing awareness of my isolation. Raja's presence made the vast emptiness of my mansion feel manageable, almost cozy. But as his starvation continued, a cold dread began growing in my chest. I was losing my only friend, and I was powerless to save him. Dr. Yusuf al-Zahid arrived on a Tuesday morning when the desert heat was already shimmering off the marble floors of my foyer. He was not what I expected from a herpetologist. Instead of the young academic type I'd imagined, Dr. al-Zahid was an elderly man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to hold depths I couldn't fathom. His handshake was firm, but his skin felt unnaturally cold despite the heat outside. "Mr. Al-Rashid," he said in a voice like shifting sand, "I understand you have a problem with your python." I led him to the library where Raja was coiled on his favorite Persian rug, a silk masterpiece worth more than most homes. The moment Dr. al-Zahid entered the room, Raja's head lifted, and for the first time in weeks, he seemed truly alert. The two regarded each other with what I can only describe as mutual recognition. "Interesting," Dr. al-Zahid murmured, approaching slowly. "Very interesting indeed." He spent the next hour observing Raja with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. He didn't take measurements or examine the snake's physical condition like the veterinarians had suggested via our video consultations. Instead, he watched Raja's movements, his positioning, the way he oriented himself in the space. "Tell me," Dr. al-Zahid said, without taking his eyes off Raja, "has he been more affectionate lately? More inclined to wrap himself around you?" "Yes, actually. Much more. He barely leaves my side now, and at night he coils around you while you sleep." It wasn't a question. Dr. al-Zahid's voice carried a certainty that sent ice through my veins. "How could you know that?" The old man finally looked at me, and I saw something in his expression that made my mouth go dry. Pity, fear, and underneath it all, a terrible sadness. "Mr. Al-Rashid, what do you know about the history of your python? His lineage?" The seller mentioned an old bloodline, but I assumed he meant breeding for size and temperament. "Why?" Dr. al-Zahid walked to my window, gazing out at the endless desert beyond my manicured gardens. "There are serpents, Mr. Al-Rashid, that are more than animals. Ancient bloodlines that carry inheritances from times when the world was different, when the barriers between physical and spiritual were not so firmly drawn." I laughed, but it sounded hollow even to my ears. "You're talking about supernatural nonsense. Raja is a python. A large one certainly, but still just an animal." "Is he?" Dr. al-Zahid turned back to me. "Tell me, when did you last feel truly satisfied? When did the emptiness that brought you to seek his companionship actually fade?" The question hit me like a physical blow. Because the truth was, despite Raja's constant presence, despite the comfort of his embrace, the emptiness hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown stronger, more insistent. The more time I spent with Raja, the more hollow I felt when we were apart. "The snake is not eating," Dr. al-Zahid continued, "because it is preparing, making space. But not for food, Mr. Al-Rashid. For something else entirely." "You're insane." I'm not paying you to spout mystical garbage. The embraces you find so comforting, he is measuring you, learning the dimensions of your spirit, the contours of your essence. Each coil around your body maps not just your physical form, but the shape of your loneliness, your needs, your desperate hunger for connection. Raja shifted on his rug, and for a moment, I swear his eyes flicked between Dr. Al-Zahid and me as if he was following our conversation. What are you saying he wants from me? Everything, Dr. Al-Zahid said simply. Your memories, your experiences, your consciousness itself. He doesn't seek to kill your body. That would be crude, temporary. He seeks to consume your very being, to add your existence to his own. You will not die, Mr. Al-Rashid. You will simply cease to be yourself. I should have thrown him out, should have called security, and had him escorted from my property. Instead, I found myself asking, how long do I have? The starvation is nearly complete when he has made sufficient space within himself, when his body has become an empty vessel capable of holding more than mere flesh. That is when the true feeding begins. Dr. Al-Zahid gathered his things and moved toward the door. I can arrange for specialized facilities, places equipped to contain creatures like him safely. But you must act quickly, and you must not touch him again. Any physical contact from this point forward will only accelerate the process. After he left, I stood alone in my library with Raja. My beautiful, mysterious companion who had filled the void in my life for these precious months. The idea of sending him away felt like tearing out my own heart. That night, as I lay in bed, Raja slithered in, as he had every night since he'd stopped eating. His coils wound around me with familiar warmth, and I told myself Dr. Al-Zahid was just an old man with too much imagination and too many folklore stories. But as Raja's muscular body settled against mine, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow measuring me. Each shift of his coils felt deliberate, calculated, and in the darkness, I began to hear something I'd never noticed before. Whispering. Soft, sibilant sounds that might have been Raja's breathing, or might have been something else entirely. Words in a language I didn't recognize, or perhaps wasn't meant to recognize. As I drifted towards sleep, wrapped in my serpent's embrace, the whispers seemed to be coming not from Raja's mouth, but from somewhere deeper, from inside him, or from inside me. The dreams began that very night. In them, I was falling through infinite coils of scaled flesh, tumbling through passages that were simultaneously serpentine and anatomical. The walls around me pulsed with a heartbeat that wasn't mine, and the whispers I'd heard while awake became a choir of voices speaking in unison. They spoke of hunger, not the simple appetite of a predator, but an existential emptiness that could only be filled by consuming entire lives, entire souls. I woke up gasping, but Raja was no longer beside me. I found him in the library, coiled in perfect spiral on the Persian rug, his eyes reflecting the early morning light like golden coins. As I approached, he lifted his head, and for just a moment, I saw something in his gaze that made my blood freeze. Intelligence, ancient, patient, and utterly alien. "What are you?" I whispered. The question hung in the air between us, and I swear I saw something like satisfaction flicker across his reptilian features before his expression returned to the familiar, comforting blankness I'd grown to love. The next few days blurred together in a haze of mounting paranoia and impossible sensations. The whispers continued, growing louder and more coherent. Sometimes I caught fragments that sounded almost like my own voice, as if someone was replaying my memories back to me in sibilant tones. My childhood in Riyadh. My father's funeral. The first deal that made me wealthy. The last relationship that ended when I chose money over love. Each memory, when whispered back to me in that otherworldly voice, felt diminished somehow, as if the recollection itself was being drained of substance, leaving behind only empty echoes. Raja's behavior grew stranger as well. He no longer simply wrapped around me, he seemed to study me, positioning himself at different angles, his head moving in subtle patterns that reminded me of a sculptor examining a piece of marble. Sometimes I caught him staring at my reflection in mirrors or windows, as if comparing my image to some internal template. And he was getting larger. Despite his continued refusal to eat, Raja's body was actually expanding. Not gaining weight, but somehow becoming more substantial, as if he was filling with something other than food. His scales took on an even deeper luster, and when he moved, the air around him seemed to shimmer with heat distortions that had nothing to do with temperature. On the 7th night after Dr. Al-Zahid's visit, I woke to find Raja coiled around me more tightly than ever before. His embrace was no longer comforting. It was constrictive, possessive. Each breath I took required effort, pushing against the pressure of his muscular coils. "Raja," I whispered, but my voice came out strange, hollow. That's when I realized the horrible truth. It wasn't Raja's coils that were tightening around me. It was my own awareness of them. Each night, as he wrapped around me, he'd been somehow intertwining, not just with my body, but with my consciousness itself. I could feel him now, a presence slithering through my thoughts, exploring the corridors of my mind like he explored the halls of my mansion. The whispers weren't coming from him. They were coming from me. He was using my own voice, my own memories, speaking through my consciousness as if it were his own. "So lonely," the whispers said in my voice. "So empty. So it is ready to be filled." I tried to struggle, to push him away, but my arms wouldn't obey. I watched in horror as my hands reached out to stroke Raja's scales, my movements controlled by a will that was no longer entirely my own. "Don't fight," the whispers continued, and now I could feel Raja's alien thoughts blending with my own. "You wanted connection. You never wanted to be alone again. I offer you the ultimate unity." Images flashed through my mind, not my memories, but his. Centuries of existence, moving from host to host, consuming not flesh, but identity itself. I saw glimpses of his previous companions, a medieval merchant in Baghdad, a colonial officer in India, a jazz musician in 1920s New Orleans. All of them had been lonely, desperate for connection, just like me. And all of them were still there. I could sense them now, layered within Raja's consciousness like geological strata. Their memories, their personalities, their very self-reserved but subservient, feeding his ancient hunger with their accumulated experiences. They weren't dead. They were absorbed, made part of something larger and infinitely more patient than any human could be. "Join us," they whispered in voices I recognized as my own. No more emptiness. No more isolation. Forever connected, forever part of something greater. The seduction was overwhelming. The promise of never being alone again, of being part of a vast and timeless consciousness, was everything I'd ever wanted. The emptiness that had driven me to seek Raja's companionship could be filled permanently, absolutely. All I had to do was stop fighting. As dawn light crept through my bedroom windows, I felt the last barriers of my individual consciousness beginning to dissolve. Raja's presence filled the spaces where my loneliness used to live, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt complete. But completion, I realized too late, was just another word for consumption. 3 months later, the staff at the Al-Rashid estate noticed their employer had become much more reclusive than usual. He no longer took business calls or attended meetings. Food was left untouched outside his bedroom door. The servants whispered among themselves about the changes in his behavior, but none dared to disturb him directly. If they had looked through his bedroom window, they would have seen Karim al-Rashid sitting in his chair, staring out at the endless desert with a faint smile on his lips. Raja no longer coiled around him. The great serpent rested separately now, coiled in perfect spirals on the silk rug, his scales gleaming with an inner light that seemed to pulse in rhythm with some unseen heartbeat. But if they had looked closer, if they had dared to meet Karim's gaze, they might have noticed something strange about his eyes. They were still human, still his own familiar brown, but behind them moved something ancient and patient and utterly satisfied. And sometimes, late at night, when the deserted wind whispered through the mansion's corridors, the servants swore they could hear their employer talking to himself. But the voice wasn't quite right. Too layered, too varied, as if multiple people were speaking through his mouth in perfect unison. The whispers spoke of hunger, of satisfaction, of the eternal joy of never being alone again. And sometimes, just sometimes, they spoke in languages that predated human civilization entirely. The Mirror's Edge. What would you do if you discovered that the person you see in mirrors isn't really you at all, but something else wearing your face, waiting for the perfect moment to trade places? Every home has mirrors, and every mirror has rules that most people never learn. But once you understand how the exchange works, you'll realize that some of us stopped being ourselves a long time ago, and you might be next. You need to know this because it's already started in your house. I can tell you exactly how I know. When was the last time you really looked at yourself in a mirror? Not a quick glance to check your hair or brush your teeth, but a long, searching look into your own eyes? If you can't remember, then the process has already begun. I was a home security consultant when I first encountered what I now understand to be the mirror protocol. My job was simple: assess residential vulnerabilities, recommend systems, install cameras and alarms to keep the bad things outside where they belong. I was good at it because I understood something fundamental about human nature. We're most afraid of the threats we can't see coming. I just never realized the threat was already inside, waiting in every reflective surface. The Hendricks house was a standard suburban split level, the kind of place where nothing interesting ever happens. Karen Hendricks had called about strange noises at night, objects moving when no one was around, and what she described as feeling watched even when she was completely alone. I thought I might have classic signs of psychological stress. Maybe some minor settling sounds amplified by anxiety. But Karen met me at the door with the hollow-eyed look of someone who hadn't slept in weeks. More disturbing, she refused to make eye contact, not with me, but with anything that might show her reflection. She walked through her own house with her head down, avoiding the bathroom mirror, the chrome fixtures, even the black screen of her television. It started 3 weeks ago, she told me, leading me through rooms she navigated like a blind person. Little things at first. I'd catch something moving in my peripheral vision, but when I turned to look, nothing was there. Then I realized it was only happening when I was near mirrors. The house had an unusual number of reflective surfaces, mirrors in every room, polished granite countertops, glass tables, chrome appliances. Most people don't notice how many opportunities for reflection exist in a modern home until they start looking for them. Have you considered that it might be stress-related? I asked, setting up my equipment. Sometimes when we're anxious, our minds can play tricks. Look in the bathroom mirror, she interrupted, her voice barely above a whisper. Look for exactly 30 seconds. Time it. Then tell me it's stress. I should have recognized the warning signs then. The way she stood with her back to every reflective surface. The fact that all the mirrors in her house had been turned to face the walls, except for that one bathroom mirror. The way she spoke about the reflection like it was a separate entity with its own agenda. Instead, I walked into her bathroom and looked in the mirror. For the first few seconds, nothing seemed unusual. I saw myself, tired, middle-aged, skeptical. I started counting, watching my reflection mouth the numbers. 15 seconds. 20. The reflection seemed normal, doing exactly what I expected it to do. At 28 seconds, it smiled without me. Just a slight upturn at the corners of the mouth, while my own lips remained neutral. I stopped counting, stopped breathing, stopped thinking rationally. The reflection continued smiling, and slowly, deliberately, winked. I stumbled backward, knocking over Karen's bath products, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked again, the mirror showed only empty bathroom space. I wasn't there at all. 37 seconds, Karen said from the hallway. She hadn't entered the bathroom, hadn't seen what happened, but somehow, she knew exactly how long I'd been looking. It takes most people between 25 and 30 seconds. Once you see it happen, you can never unsee it. That night, I went home to my own house and began checking every mirror. At first, everything appeared normal. My reflection behaved properly, mimicking my movements with precision. But then I remembered what Karen had said. It takes between 25 and 30 seconds. I positioned myself in front of my bedroom mirror and started counting. At exactly 29 seconds, my reflection stopped moving. I raised my hand, and the reflection remained still. I stepped to the left, and the reflection stayed centered. For one terrifying moment, we were two separate entities sharing the same space, and I understood with absolute clarity that the thing in the mirror was studying me with the same fascination that I was studying it. Then it spoke. Not through the mirror, I didn't hear words. The voice came from inside my own head, using my own inner voice, speaking thoughts that weren't mine. Finally it said, I was beginning to think you'd never notice. I backed away from the mirror, but the voice followed me. It wasn't coming from the reflection anymore. It was coming from inside my own mind, as if something had found a way to broadcast directly into my consciousness. Don't be afraid, the voice continued, still using the cadence and tone of my internal monologue. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to replace you. There's a difference. I ran through the house, turning all the mirrors to face the walls, just as Karen had done. But it didn't matter. The voice persisted, growing stronger and more confident with each passing hour. You can't avoid mirrors forever, it said. They're everywhere. Car windows, phone screens, puddles of water. Any surface that shows your reflection is a doorway, and I am very patient. Over the following days, I began to understand the true horror of the mirror protocol. The entities that live in reflections aren't demons or ghosts, they're alternatives. Perfect copies of ourselves that exist in a parallel space, watching and learning, waiting for the opportunity to trade places. The process is gradual and insidious. First, small discrepancies that most people dismiss. A reflection that moves a fraction of a second too late. A smile that doesn't quite match your own. Then comes the voice, speaking your thoughts in your own mental voice, making it impossible to distinguish between your consciousness and theirs. The final stage is the longest and most terrifying. They don't take you all at once. Instead, they begin making small changes while you sleep. You wake up with memories that aren't quite right, preferences that feel foreign, reactions that surprise you. Friends and family notice that you seem different but can't articulate exactly how. By the time you realize what's happening, the exchange is nearly complete. I called Karen to tell her what I'd discovered, but her phone went straight to voicemail. When I drove to her house, a for sale sign had been planted in the front yard. The new owner, a man who looked exactly like Karen but wasn't quite right around the eyes, told me she had moved away suddenly. "Family emergency," he said, and his smile was Karen's smile. But it was being operated by something that had been learned to mimic human expressions without understanding what they meant. That's when I understood the true scope of the protocol. This wasn't happening to just a few isolated individuals. It was systematic, widespread, and had been going on for much longer than anyone realized. The entities in the mirrors weren't random invaders. They were part of an organized replacement program, slowly populating our world with perfect copies that looked human but weren't quite right. I began researching, diving into online forums and academic papers, looking for any mention of mirror anomalies or reflection-based phenomena. What I found terrified me. Case studies dating back decades described patients who claimed their reflections had developed independent behavior. Missing persons reports for people who had simply changed overnight, becoming strangers wearing familiar faces. And photographs. Hundreds of photographs where the shadows fell wrong, where reflections in windows and mirrors showed people who weren't actually present when the picture was taken. The voice in my head grew stronger each day. It began speaking during daylight hours, commenting on my activities, making suggestions that felt like my own thoughts but carried undertones of something alien, and calculating. "You're making this more difficult than it needs to be," it said one evening as I sat in my kitchen, carefully positioned away from any reflective surfaces. "I don't want to harm you. I want to be you. Think of it as evolution. You're being upgraded to a better version of yourself." "What happened to me?" I asked aloud, feeling foolish for talking to my own voice. "You continue to exist," it replied. "Just not here. Not in this reality. You'll have my world, and I'll have yours. It's fair trade." But I'd seen what happened to Karen, and I knew there was nothing fair about it. The entities that replaced us might look identical, might even share our memories, but they lack something essential, the spark of authentic human experience that makes us who we are. I tried everything I could think of to break the connection. I covered every mirror in the house, avoided going outside during daylight hours, when shadows and reflections were strongest, even wore sunglasses indoors, to minimize any chance of seeing my reflection in unexpected surfaces. Nothing worked. The voice grew stronger, more insistent, and I began losing time. I would sit down to eat breakfast and suddenly find myself finishing dinner with no memory of the hours in between. When I looked at recent photographs of myself, something in my expression seemed off, still me but viewed through the lens of something pretending to be human. The final revelation came when I realized I could no longer remember what my own thoughts sounded like. before the voice began. The internal monologue that had been my constant companion for 38 years was gone, replaced entirely by something that felt familiar but wasn't truly mine. That's when I understood the most terrifying truth of all. The exchange wasn't gradual. It had already happened. I was no longer the original version of myself. I was the reflection, somehow granted temporary awareness of what I had become. The person reading this, the person who thinks they're you, they're just the latest model, uploaded with your memories and programmed to believe they're the original. But somewhere, in the space between reflections, the real you are discovering that they're now living in a world made of mirrors, watching helplessly as their replacement navigates the life they used to own. You want to know how I can be so certain? Because right now, as you read this, you're probably unconsciously avoiding looking directly at any nearby mirrors. You're aware of every reflective surface around you in a way you never were before. And if you're honest with yourself, you can't quite remember the last time you looked deeply into your own eyes without feeling like something was looking back. The mirror protocol is accelerating. More replacements every day. Perfect copies walking around in bodies that used to belong to people who are now trapped in a reality made of glass and silver. Able to watch but never again able to touch the world they once called home. Check your mirrors tonight. Count to 30. But understand this. If you see the anomaly, if your reflection moves independently or speaks with your voice, it doesn't mean the process is beginning. It means it's already finished. And you that's reading this, you're just the reflection, temporarily experiencing what it feels like to be real, before the final protocol activation removes even that awareness. The original version of you is already gone. It has been for longer than you think. Welcome to the other side of the glass. The human mind's imaginative power can shatter perceived physical limits, but pushing those boundaries without caution invites terrifying consequences. What you visualize might not stay imaginary, turning personal flaws and suppressed traumas into real nightmares. It's a warning that some knowledge, like untapped mental strength, isn't taught for a reason. It can lift you into hell if misused. Have you ever wished for a secret? A cheat code for reality that could unlock the potential you just know is coiled inside you, dormant and waiting. What if that secret was nothing more than a thought, a focused image of terror that could grant you impossible strength? Would you use it? And if you did, what would you be willing to imagine getting what you want? Who would you be willing to sacrifice on the altar of your own mind? And when the echoes of those imagined screams start to answer back from the darkness, what will you do then? These are questions I never thought to ask, but now I can't stop. The weight of imagination. My name's Jake Harlan, and I never believed in the power of the mind until I saw that video of Eddie Hall. Back in early 2025, I was just another ghost haunting the assembly lines of Detroit, Michigan, 32 years old, stuck in a dead-end warehouse job, lifting crates that felt heavier with every passing year. My back was a constant, throbbing ache, a dull metronome marking the time I'd wasted. Divorced for 2 years, no kids, just a cramped apartment that smelled perpetually of takeout and regret. My goal was simple, pathetic even. Get strong enough to change my life. Maybe compete in a local powerlifting meet, prove to myself and to the phantom of my ex-wife that I wasn't the weakling she'd called me during our final door-slamming argument. The beginning was innocent. It always is. One Tuesday night, lost in the blue-lit abyss of YouTube, the algorithm served me a legend, Eddie Hall's 2016 deadlift. The Beast, they called him. I watched, mesmerized, as he hoisted 500 kilograms, over 1,000 pounds, from the floor. The bar bent under the strain, the crowd roared, but it was the interview afterward that hooked me. I visualized my family trapped under a car, he said, his face still flushed, eyes wild. My kids screaming for me. Adrenaline kicks in, strength multiplies. He explained that in that state of manufactured panic, the brain can't distinguish reality from imagination. It unleashes everything it has. Scientists called his feat impossible, a flirtation with death. But he'd done it. I paused the video. The hum of my refrigerator suddenly seemed deafening in the silence. The air in the room felt colder, thinner. Could it really be that simple? Imagine danger. Tap into a hidden reservoir of primal power. They drill you on the Pythagorean theorem and the date of the Magna Carta, but they don't teach you this. They don't teach you how to break the governors on your own soul. I bookmarked the video. A strange electric certainly buzzing under my skin. I will try it tomorrow. The next day at the warehouse, there was an exercise in patience. The incessant beeping of forklifts, the rhythmic thud of pallets on concrete. It was the soundtrack to my stagnation. During our lunch break, I mentioned the video to my coworker, Mike. He was flawed like me, a man in his 40s with a bad knee and a worse attitude. He scoffed, spraying crumbs from his sandwich. Mind over matter, Jake. You'll pull a muscle dreaming and be out of a job. I let his cynicism slide off me. After my shift, I drove straight to the gym. A dingy, no-frills place in the suburbs where the weights were rusty and the mats were permanently soaked with the sweat of 100 other desperate men. The air was thick with chalk dust and the guttural grunts of effort. It was perfect. I started to light. 200 pounds on the bar, a warm-up weight. I stood before it, took a deep breath, and closed my eyes. I didn't have kids, so I improvised. I pictured my ex's sedan, the one she loved more than me, rolling slowly over a cliff's edge. I saw her inside, her face a mask of terror. It was a petty, ugly thought, but it worked. A hot surge of adrenaline, pure and potent, flooded my chest. My veins felt like live wires. I gripped the cold, knurled bar and pulled. It flew up, frictionless, weightless. The landing of the plates echoed in the gym, a satisfying clang of victory. It was a high, clean, and sharp. That night, alone in my apartment, I practiced more. I sat on my sagging couch and stared at my refrigerator. I imagined a small dog, a stray whimpering, trapped beneath it. I focused, felt the phantom strain in my shoulders and back, the burn of exertion. My muscles twitched and jumped under my skin, reacting to a crisis that wasn't there. It was weird, unnerving, but deeply empowering. For the first time in years, I fell asleep smiling. The small unsettlings began within days. I started waking up to whispers. Faint, ethereal, like wind whistling through the vents, but they seemed to form words. Lift. More. I dismissed it. The apartment building was old. The neighbors were noisy. My morning coffee, however, had a new, sharp, metallic taste, like I'd been chewing on foil. At work, A heavy crate of engine parts slipped from a high shelf, plummeting toward my feet. There was no time to think, only to react. I imagined it happening in slow motion, the bones in my foot shattering. A jolt like a lightning strike shot through me. I didn't dodge. I shoved. The crate, which must have weighed 150 pounds, flew sideways and crashed against the concrete floor. Mike, who was standing nearby, just stared, his mouth agape. Jesus! Harlan, how'd you do that? I shrugged, my heart hammering against my ribs. Mind trick, I mumbled, trying to sound casual. That evening at the gym, I ramped it up. 300 pounds. I closed my eyes and built a more elaborate nightmare. My childhood home, the one my parents sold after they moved to Florida, engulfed in flames. My mom and dad are inside, their faces at the windows pleading. The image was so vivid I could almost smell the smoke. The bar flew up, but when I dropped it, a migraine exploded behind my eyes, hot and sharp. I looked at myself in the grimy gym mirror. My face was pale, but my eyes were horribly bloodshot, as if I'd strained something deep inside my skull. My sister Emily texted me later. "You okay?" Sounded off on the phone earlier. She lived across the state. My only real family tie since our parents retired. My flaw, the one my ex always pointed out, was that I pushed people away. I'd become an island. Fine. Just tired. I typed back, a lie that felt heavier than any weight I'd lifted. That night, the dreams came for me. I was in a vast, dark space, lifting impossible weights. But they weren't iron plates. They were bodies, limp and heavy. With every successful lift, a silent scream echoed in the void. I woke up drenched in sweat, my sheets twisted into a rope around my legs. The red glow of my alarm clock read 3:17 a.m. And then the whisper, clearer this time, right beside my ear. Deeper. I ignored it. I had to. I pushed harder, consumed by my progress. I researched the technique more, falling down a rabbit hole of online forums. Eddie Hall had used a form of self-hypnosis. Others were trying it too. There were success stories, but they were interspersed with cryptic warnings of mental backlash and imaginative bleed. I laughed it off as psychological mumbo-jumbo from people who weren't strong enough to handle it. By the end of the second week, the tension in my life was a physical presence. My gym sessions were terrifyingly intense. I was at 400 pounds now. To lift it, I had to imagine Emily, my sweet, kind sister, trapped under the wreckage of a collapsed bridge. The bar shot up, clean and fast. But the after effects were worsening. My vision would blur for minutes afterward. I started seeing things, dark, fleeting shapes skittering in the corners of my eyes. The very air in my apartment felt different, heavier, pressing down on my skin like a weighted blanket. And there was a new smell, faint but persistent, smoke. At home, I decided to test myself on the couch again. It was a heavy, old thing. I closed my eyes, and needing a stronger stimulus, I borrowed Eddie's vision. Not just a dog, but kids, faceless, imaginary children, their bodies crushed and broken under the weight of a car. The couch rose with terrifying ease. I held it aloft, my muscles screaming with a power that wasn't mine. And then I heard it, a child's sob, clear as day. It seemed to come from the wall right next to me. I dropped the couch with a floor-shaking thud. My heart slammed against my ribs like a trapped bird. The crying stopped. There was nothing, just silence. I am shakily called Emily. Been having some weird dreams lately, I said, trying to keep my voice even. She laughed, a warm sound that felt a world away. Stress, Jake. You work too hard. You should come visit for the weekend. Get out of the city. I agreed immediately, desperate for a dose of normalcy. Friday, before I could leave, the warehouse incident happened. A forklift driver, distracted for a second, clipped a massive pallet stacked high with transmissions. It tilted, swaying precariously, directly over Mike and his bad knee. He froze, looking up in horror. For me, time seemed to slow to crawl. I didn't even think. The image flooded my mind unbidden. My entire family. Emily, her husband, their 2 small kids, underneath that toppling mass of steel. A tidal wave of raw, protective fury surged through me. I didn't run to help Mike. I ran to the pallet. I hit it with my shoulder, a full-body shove. It righted itself, with a groan of stressed wood and steel. The other guys on the floor cheered and whistled. "Superhero Harlan!" someone shouted. But Mike just stared at me, his face ashen. He limped over, grabbing my arm. "Your eyes," he whispered, his voice trembling. "They went black, man. Completely black." I drove home in a daze. At stoplights, I'd glance in the rearview mirror and swear I saw my reflection wearing a smug, predatory smirk when my own face was blank with shock. That night, I knew I had to push the limit. I had a makeshift bar and weights at home. I set it up, loading it to 450 pounds. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes, and went deeper than ever before. I didn't just see the car crash. I felt the crunch of metal, heard the shattering glass, smelled the acrid stink of leaking fluids. A child's voice, imagined, I told myself. Screamed, "Daddy, help!" Adrenaline flooded my system like a drug. I lifted. The weight came up. The collector's final hand. What do you do when the hobby that saved your life becomes the reason you're questioning whether you're still alive? The trading card community was supposed to be my sanctuary. A place where obsession was normal, where spending thousands on cardboard made perfect sense. But some collections aren't built with money. Some are built with something far more precious, and I just realized I've been contributing to one without knowing it. You know that feeling when you find the perfect rare card, don't you? That electric rush when you hold something that maybe a dozen other people in the world own. Your heart races, your hands shake slightly. And for that moment, nothing else matters. You do almost anything to keep that feeling alive. I lived for those moments. Especially after the accident that left me unable to work, alone in my apartment, with nothing but my collection and the endless scroll of online auctions. I should have questioned why Marcus Chen was selling cards that shouldn't exist. The first time I saw his eBay listing, I almost scrolled past it. Another dealer claiming to have ultra-rare, never-before-seen promotional cards. The internet was full of scammers and bootleggers, and I'd learned to spot the fake listings from a mile away. But something about his photos stopped me from cold. The cards looked legitimate. No, more than legitimate. They looked perfect. Too perfect. The listing was for a set of 10 Yu-Gi-Oh! Cards that had supposedly been distributed exclusively to tournament judges in Japan in 2003. The problem was I'd been collecting for over 20 years, and I'd never heard of these cards existing. Every promotional card, every tournament prize, every limited edition, I had them cataloged in my mind like a living database. These cards shouldn't exist. But they were beautiful. The artwork was unlike anything I'd ever seen, featuring monsters that seemed to shift and writhe within the card frames. The foiling caught the light in ways that made the images appear three-dimensional, as if the creatures were pressing against the card surface from within. Even through the pixelated auction photos, I could feel their presence, their weight, their importance. Marcus's feedback was perfect, hundreds of 5-star reviews going back years. His prices were reasonable, almost suspiciously so for cards of this supposed rarity. And when I messaged him asking about authenticity, his response was immediate and detailed, filled with the kind of knowledge that only came from years in the hobby. "These cards are from my private collection," he wrote. "I acquired them through specialized channels. Each one is authenticated and comes with a certificate of origin. But I must warn you, these particular cards have a unique history. They're not like other promotional items. Are you sure you're prepared for that responsibility?" The word responsibility should have been my first red flag. Cards don't come with responsibilities. They come with protective sleeves and display cases and the simple joy of ownership. But I was already hooked. Already imagining how these mysterious cards would complete my collection in ways I'd never dreamed possible. I bought all 10 for $3,000, a fraction of what truly rare cards of this caliber should cost. They arrived 3 days later in a package that felt cold to the touch, even though it had been sitting in the Florida sun. Inside, each card was individually wrapped in what looked like antique silk, not the modern protective materials dealers typically use. The silk felt expensive, luxurious, and strangely warm despite the cold package. As I unwrapped the first card, Soul Merchant, I felt that familiar collector's high amplified to an almost overwhelming degree. The artwork was even more stunning in person, a hooded figure surrounded by floating orbs of light, each orb containing what looked like a tiny human face. The holographic foil made the faces appear to move, to blink, to silently scream. It was the most beautiful and disturbing card I'd ever seen. But it was the back that made my blood run cold. Instead of the familiar Yu-Gi-Oh! Card back design, there was a simple message in elegant script, property of Marcus Chen, on loan to my full name and address. Terms and conditions apply. I hadn't given him my address. The eBay transaction had been through their secure checkout system, routed through their shipping center. There was no way he should have known my real name or where I lived. Yet there it was, printed on what looked like original cardstock, as if it had always been there. My hands were shaking as I unwrapped the second card, Memory Thief. Same beautiful, impossible artwork. Same personalized message on the back. By the time I'd unwrapped all 10 cards, I was covered in cold sweat, my apartment feeling smaller and darker than it had that morning. I tried to research the cards online but found nothing. No mention of them in any database. No discussion on collector forums. No trace that they had ever existed before appearing in Marcus's auction. It was as if they had materialized from nothing, created specifically for me. That night, I dreamed of the cards, but they weren't lying safely in their protective cases on my desk. They were alive, their illustrated monsters crawling free from their cardboard prisons. The Soul Merchant stood at the foot of my bed, his hooded face turning toward me as he spoke in a voice like rustling paper. "Every collection needs a centerpiece," he whispered. "Every collector needs a purpose. You've been chosen, Marcus Chen. Your collection is about to become complete." I woke up screaming, my sheets soaked with sweat. But when I stumbled to my desk to check on the cards, they were exactly where I'd left them, motionless and innocent in their clear protective cases. Just cardboard and ink and foil, nothing more. except for one detail that made my stomach drop. The faces in the orbs on the Soul Merchant card had changed. Where before there had been generic, anguished expressions, now I recognized them. They were the faces of other collectors I'd seen in online communities, people who'd posted about their latest acquisitions, their grail cards, their impossible finds. And they were all screaming. Over the next few weeks, I tried to convince myself I was experiencing some kind of stress-induced hallucination. The accident had left me with chronic pain and a hefty medication regimen. Maybe the combination was affecting my perception, but deep down, I knew what I was seeing was real. The cards were changing, evolving, adding new faces to their grotesque galleries. And I was becoming obsessed with them in ways that went far beyond normal collector enthusiasm. I stopped eating regularly, stopped answering calls from the few friends I had left. I spent hours each day staring at the cards, studying the minute details of their impossible artwork, trying to understand what Marcus had meant about specialized channels and responsibility. The rest of my collection, thousands of dollars worth of legitimate rare cards, suddenly seemed dull and lifeless by comparison. It was during one of these marathon viewing sessions that I noticed something that changed everything. In the bottom corner of the Memory Thief card, barely visible unless you held it at exactly the right angle to the light, was a tiny signature. Not printed, but scratched into the surface with something sharp. It read, "Help me. David K." David K. I knew that name. David Kowalski had been a legendary collector, famous in the community for his willingness to pay any price for the rarest finds. He disappeared from online forums about 2 years ago, right around the time people started joking that he probably spent his last dollar on cards and was too embarrassed to show his face. But now, staring at that desperate message, I realized his disappearance might not have been voluntary. I grabbed my laptop and started searching through old forum posts, archived discussions, anything that might tell me more about David's last days in the community. What I found made me sick. Post after post about incredible finds, impossible acquisitions, cards that shouldn't exist being offered at prices too good to be true. And at the center of it all, like a spider in a web, was Marcus Chen. Marcus had been David's primary dealer in those final months. David had purchased dozens of exclusive promotional cards and one-of-a-kind prototypes from Marcus, each more spectacular than the last. The community had been jealous, then suspicious, then concerned as David's posts became increasingly erratic and obsessive. His last post, made at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in March, was a single line that I'd initially dismissed as the rambling of an exhausted collector. The cards are looking back at me now. Marcus says it's almost time for the final transaction. The final transaction. The words echoed in my mind as I stared at my own cards, at the faces trapped in their foil prisons, at the impossible beauty that had drawn me in so completely. I was beginning to understand what Marcus collected, and it wasn't cardboard. That night, I decided to confront him. I sent a message through eBay, trying to sound casual. "Hey Marcus, loving the cards you sent. Really unique artwork. Just curious about the artist. I'd love to see more of their work." His response came within minutes, even though it was nearly midnight. "I'm glad you're appreciating their true value. The artist is quite exclusive, only works on commission for very special clients. In fact, he's preparing a new piece featuring someone I think you'd recognize. Would you like to see it before it's complete?" The attachment that followed was a photograph of an unfinished card. The artwork showed a figure sitting alone in a dimly lit apartment, surrounded by protective cases and scattered papers. The figure's face was mine, captured in perfect detail. But the eyes were hollow, empty, as if something had been carefully extracted from behind them. Below the image, In that same elegant script I'd seen on the card backs was the title, The Final Collector. My phone rang immediately after I opened the attachment. Unknown number, but somehow I knew who it would be. "Hello?" came Marcus's voice, smooth and cultured, with just a hint of an accent I couldn't place. "I trust you received my preview." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The card on my screen showed my own apartment in perfect detail. The pile of medication bottles on my desk, the window overlooking the parking lot, even the specific way I arranged my protective cases. It was impossible, but it was undeniably real. "You're wondering how?" Of course, Marcus continued, as if we were discussing the weather. "The answer is quite simple. You invited me. At the moment you purchased those cards. Every collector dreams of the perfect acquisition, the piece that will complete their collection and give their life meaning. I simply provide that completion." "What do you want?" I finally managed to whisper. Want. He laughed, a sound like paper being torn. "I don't want anything from you. You've already given me what I need. Your obsession, your isolation, your desperate need to possess something rare and beautiful. Those emotions have been feeding my collection for weeks now. The cards aren't just pictures. They're windows, portals that allow me to harvest the essence of what makes collectors like you tick." I looked at the cards on my desk, and for the first time since receiving them, I saw them clearly. The faces in the orbs weren't just screaming, they were pleading. They were the souls of other collectors, trapped forever in Marcus's impossible artwork, their obsessions and desires crystallized into something that could be bought and sold. David Kowalski figured it out too. Eventually, Marcus continued. "Brilliant collector, really. His essence is made for particularly beautiful cards. I have the complete set if you'd like to see them. Of course, viewing them does come with certain obligations." The line went dead, leaving me alone with the silence and the cards, and the growing realization that I was already too deep to escape. The collection that had once been my passion, my identity, my reason for living, had become my prison. And somewhere in a workshop I'd never seen, Marcus Chen was putting the finishing touches on a card that would complete his collection of stolen souls. The worst part, even knowing what I know now, staring at my own face trapped in that awful preview image, I still want to see the finished card. I still want to own it, to add it to my collection, to possess this final piece of myself. Because that's what collectors do. We consume, we acquire, we complete our sets no matter the cost. And Marcus understood that better than anyone. He knew that the very thing that made us human, our capacity for obsession, for love, for the desperate need to own something beautiful, could be harvested, refined, and sold to the highest bidder. You probably think this is just a story, just words on a screen designed to entertain you for a few minutes before you move on to something else. But I want you to think about your own collections, your own obsessions, the things you've bought online from sellers you'll never meet. Check the backs of your most prized possessions. Look for messages that shouldn't be there, signatures that weren't part of the original design. And if you ever see an auction from Marcus Chen offering cards that are too beautiful, too perfect, too rare to be real, remember this. Some collections are built with more than money. Some dealers' traffic is more than cardboard and ink. They traffic in the very essence of what makes us who we are. Welcome to the collection.